Welcome everyone to InsurTech Rising Live. Over the course of this week, we will be bringing you a range of webinars, thought leadership articles, as well as our first e-magazine of 2019. Remember to visit the InsurTech Rising 365 blog for all Digital Week content. In our first webinar of the Digital Week, we welcome Shefali Sompar, Cole Sirusek, Thibault Temors, and Julian Salaveri to discuss the current state of InsurTech and health in Asia. We will be live tweeting this webinar, so you can join in the conversation using the hashtag InsurTech Rising Live. While our webinars this week have been pre-recorded, you can still submit questions during the presentation. Send them to us using the Ask a Question module on your screen or by tweeting us. We will be passing these on to the presenters and coming back with a unique article featuring the answers. You will also notice that we have compiled a resource list of all of our webinars. Feel free to download and click through the information we have created for you. I will now hand over to Shefali.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Diagnostic of Healthcare in Asia webinar. I would like to start by saying thank you so much for joining this webinar. I can see some participants are joining, and it's a very, very interesting topic, especially because healthcare in the Asian market is very diverse and very complex. The niche markets within each of the geographies is very unique, and the players therein need to adjust and accommodate to the specificities of that particular market. The players in the market are the insurers, the healthcare providers, and the customers themselves, and the various intermediaries therein who connect each other. The uniqueness of this market allows for a flourishing health tech environment. But these health tech environments are facing their own share of challenges and their share of opportunities. We have an impressive lineup of panelists today for the session who are going to share their thoughts on what the market today holds and what the future of healthcare and health tech can look like in Asia. It is my privilege to introduce Thibault Temors is the Asia Head Health Solutions Development AXA Partners. Thibault has been working in the health insurance space in Asia for 15 years. First on the distribution front as an insurance broker in China mainland for 10 years, and then he moved on to AXA Insurance. Now he works for AXA Partners, a unit of AXA dedicated to innovation and partnership. In his role, Thibault is developing an ecosystem of health partners. These partners plug into services of AXA Partner Health Claims Management Platform. The second esteemed panelist we have is Cole Sirusek. He is the founder and CEO of DocDoc, which is Asia's leading patient empowerment company. Cole is an investor and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in founding, investing at various entrepreneurial ventures. He has been a key member of the Mask Holding before this role, and also had significant roles in state governments and worked on various technology, venture capital, and strategy business consulting roles. We also have Julian Salaveri, who is the CEO and co-founder of Glen Growth Asia. It's a leading exclusive health tech research, analytics, and advisory firm in APAC, serving Fortune 500 companies and global investors. He works with startups, investors, and enterprises to accelerate the ROI timeline for digital health strategy. Welcome, everybody. And I myself am Shefali Sompar. I am a senior director with UST Global, leading the insurance practice. I will be moderating the webinar today. I come with about 19 years of experience, having held leadership roles in direct insurance businesses and as part of technology solution companies. I have successfully established 3 greenfield operations within the continent as a part of Insurer's global expansion strategy. Let me jump right in and talk about the healthcare ecosystem in the Asian market. There are different drivers and players in the healthcare ecosystem. There are customers, there are providers, and finally, there are payers. Julien, would you like to share the customer perspective of the healthcare ecosystem?
Absolutely, Shrila. Thank you very much for your introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to be joining this webinar and sharing the insights that we see on a day-to-day basis in this exciting region. Before diving too quickly into the customer's perspective, it'd be worth certainly giving a few data points that give a little more insight as to the way the customer's thinking and reacting and acting within the Asia-Pacific healthcare ecosystem. I think to start with, it'd be useful to use a Barack Obama quote, obviously the previous president of the United States of America, who said that Asia Pacific is home to half the world's population. It has a growing middle class and holds so much opportunity for us all. And I think that encapsulates very much what we three speakers on this webinar are addressing on a day-to-day basis. Now, Asia Pacific, for those less familiar, really is Pakistan furthest to the west, China furthest to the east, Japan furthest north, and Australia and New Zealand furthest south. So you can see it's a very, very big region. With that large population brings a significant amount of disease burden, so to speak. And if we use some of the data from the WHO, the World Health Organization, we note that some 55% of all deaths in the region, Asia Pacific region, are due to non-communicable diseases. So the challenge is significant, and it's made more significant by the fact that the healthcare infrastructure is somewhat immature in this region. You have to look at it, though, in 3 different ways. There's very much a mature set of countries with mature, advanced healthcare systems, so Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, and Japan, for example. There is a second category, which we call more the developing infrastructure environment, which I would see China, say, and India sitting in, and they are growing very fast, and we'll come back to that. And then there's a third category called the new frontier, which are countries that are very much starting from ground zero and having to build fast. And you could include Myanmar or Cambodia in those categories. So as you can see, it's a very diverse set of healthcare ecosystems, and therefore the needs and the access that the customer has are very different. Now, you can tend to regroup those into 3 categories. Their ability to be aware of their disease, their ability to be able to access healthcare to address a disease, and of course, their ability to afford is a challenge. Give you a flavor, if you take India as an example, some 10% of the Indian population have diabetes, but only up to about 1% of those particular individuals with diabetes have actually been through diagnosis and are being treated. So hopefully that gives a good insight as to how big the challenge is and what some of the challenges are to reach that. Now, it's not all bad news. The exciting thing about the customer in Asia Pacific is that they are highly connected. The penetration of smartphones and internet is very high and growing by the day, and that we are seeing a propensity by such a customer to address their health needs online and to consume their health needs online. And by health needs, I'm not just talking about seeking a diagnosis, I'm also talking about seeking the right level of insurance cover in order to be able to afford some of this treatment down the road. As we measure this on a year-to-year basis, we do see the customer in Asia Pacific prioritizing healthcare at a much higher level year on year as one of their basic needs, and certainly looking at the health tech or the digital health side of the healthcare ecosystem as a solution to discover, identify, and consume value for money within healthcare. So it's an exciting time for the customer, but also for the provider and for all other stakeholders in healthcare as they seek to improve the standard of healthcare and therefore outcomes for the customer in Asia Pacific.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. Cole, I know you come with a very strong heart in the customer space. Would you like to share some thoughts around this?
So I think the comments that were just reflected are accurate, both in terms of kind of geography and in terms of scale and scope of the healthcare industry in Asia. It's definitely, in my opinion, the world's most exciting geography to be an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. The defining characteristic of the Asian healthcare market is really its diversity. It's diverse in about every way you can be diverse on planet Earth. From developed to developing, from different currencies, different languages, different religions. There is no one Asian healthcare consumer. So that is actually, while there's a lot of aspects of the market that are very dynamic and exciting, and there's some daunting challenges that always make for fertile ground in building a healthcare opportunity, a healthcare related venture. The sheer diversity of culture and economic system and political system and the distance in geography make doing things in Asia healthcare definitely the most complex operating environment in the world for healthcare. And at least in our opinion at DocDoc. What we've tried to do is figure out what are the common needs that can be addressed at a base level that tie the entire region together. And so one of the core things that we focus on is the category we define as patient empowerment. And that empowerment in all these different markets to varying degrees, all of the consumers really suffer from a lack of empowerment. When they go to find a doctor, for example, just at a very base level of doctor discovery, they tend to be asking their insurance agents or asking for referrals from their existing general practitioners or asking family and friends. And all of these types of discovery are really only in operation or only in use because the because there's an underlining lack of data. When you go to buy an automobile or you go to buy a piece of property, sure, you might ask friends if they think it's a good idea or not. And you might ask experts in the space for referrals. But as a whole, there's a lot of data that you can use to make an informed decision. And when you compare that to healthcare, particularly in the Asian region, there's really a complete absence of information. Consumers have no place where they can go to get information that allows them to make determinations on, am I seeing the best doctor in this region for myself? Given the condition that I have or given the procedure that I need done. And we think that that's one of the big problems in the region is around patient empowerment, around doctor discovery. Another real problem here is the way that payments are distributed. What we've found is that most of the region has great flexibility for the insured clients, whether they're employed or insured directly through a private insurance. The policyholders have the ability to see a wide variety of doctors. They're not being hemmed into any specific network, but they have to go out of pocket and be reimbursed before for the medical care they receive. And they can often be out of pocket tens of thousands of dollars, which can be a real problem. So there's another real problem in the region about cashless transactions and how do you link insurance much closer to the underlying healthcare provider so the consumer doesn't go out of pocket. And then there's also a real problem in the region that's best served through telemedicine. There are a lot of unique cases where what's really needed in terms of next steps in the care continuum is having a telemedicine type support, connecting to the right physician and being able to do a virtual consultation before you get up and travel 3 or 4 countries distance in order to see that physician. So I think the healthcare market in Asia is dynamic. It's incredibly diverse. It's aging rapidly in many of these markets, and there's huge problems that were already highlighted about diabetes. 10% of India is pre-diabetic. I'll raise you one on that. 30% of Malaysia is pre-diabetic, and the number of pre-diabetics in China in the urban settings is now also approaching 30%. So as the Asian world becomes more industrialized and their dietary habits begin to more closely align with kind of some of the Western world, we're finding that the diseases like cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular diseases are rapidly approaching what we're seeing in markets like Australia, England, and the United States. And so the problems here are undeniably large.
Excellent, Cole. That's a fabulous perspective on the customer side. And you've spoken a little about the new types of illnesses and diseases that are arising, which itself must be causing some change in dynamics on the provider perspective. Can you share some thoughts around that?
On the provider side, well, so every market's different. Again, so providers in the way providers are compensated in China versus Singapore versus Hong Kong is about as diverse as can be. In China, for example, a good 50% of the average medical take-home salary comes from pharmaceutical and device companies, and which I thought was quite interesting. If you look at, for example, a unique proclivity for the way providers look at care, or providers are compensated in China, there's the whole red packet phenomenon, where you bring in, every doctor expects to be given a large tip in order to get access. If you compare that to Singapore, in Singapore, the doctors are primarily on a fee-for-service model, where in India they're actually primarily compensated based on a hospital that is actually paying them a flat fee in a salary structure. So the providers have very different compensating mechanisms. So it's hard to kind of draw any core patterns. But one of the things I would say is that all the doctors in the market, by and large, have a problem finding the right types of patients that are most relevant to their unique practices. When you talk to most specialists, you can quickly find out what they like to treat and what they're best at treating. And the only reason they really treat outside of that area of specialty and passion is because they don't see enough patients in it. And then another one of the common problems you'll find in the medical community is they really don't like having to market. What I've found, given the lack of information in the industry, oftentimes the doctors that are deemed to be quote unquote best are really the ones that are best at marketing, not actually treating. And I think that there's a general pain point around that providers face. I think a third problem they face is really around around the amount of paperwork that they do. They feel like they're being buried in digital systems that they have to put information into. So those are kind of some of the main things that I've seen on the provider side.
Excellent. So, but there is a third very, very important component we've been talking about, and that's the insurance. Thibaut, would you like to share your thoughts on how providers' ecosystem impacts the insurance and specifically in your case, the TPA side?
So thank you very much. AXA Partners is a unit of AXA dedicated to managing health claims for insurance companies. So insurance companies are giving us a very simple mandate, and I will get to this in a minute. But this mandate is predominantly to maintain the network, so to keep the relationship with the hospitals, to facilitate payments, to negotiate when it's possible to reduce medical costs. Now, when it comes to describing providers in Asia, due to the diversity that Julian was referring to and the different tiers of countries, it's difficult to set one rule. But today, to make it black and white, in all of these countries, you've got clinics and public hospitals. It is today relatively difficult to have conversations at a third party with public hospitals, whether you talk about Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, or Malaysia. It's way more possible to have conversation with clinics, predominantly because clinics or private medical institutions are businesses. They have shareholders, and their objective is certainly to treat patients, but it's also to generate profitability for their shareholders. So in that sense, we find that as a third-party administrator, managing clinics is easier. That's all I could share on this topic.
Absolutely, Thibaut. I wouldn't agree more. One of the perspectives I think that you can very uniquely share is from a payer's perspective, and how AXA Partners as a claim partner kind of is working with the ecosystem, and what are the changes you're seeing in that ecosystem?
So as a TPA, I guess our customers, our insurance company customers, are asking us to minimize costs, right? And at the same time to maximize health outcome for the patients. That's the mandate they give us. So today we tend to tackle this by three different things. By focusing a lot on identifying fraud, waste, and abuse, meaning where is healthcare not performed in the most efficient way. We also manage a network of hospitals, so we optimize healthcare journeys. And on that front, we have formed an intent to collaborate with DocDoc on this front, because this is what DocDoc is very good at. And last, we're moving more and more into the prevention space, because prevention is progressing. It used to be a very generic term, but now you can see health tech companies coming out with individualized wellness programs that talk to you specifically, your goals, where you're starting from, where you want to be in a year, what's driving you in life. So we're doing these things. Now, today in our world, what we're moving into as a third-party administrator is changing the way all of this model is incentivized. We would be keen to collaborate with hospitals, to collaborate with insurance companies, as well as with patients, actually, to align incentives. So more and more, we're moving toward a system where the way we bill insurance companies for our services is based on how efficient we are in managing their customers and their healthcare journeys. And I see a lot of health tech companies aiming for that very same goal today. Today we've decided as a business to collaborate more and more with health tech companies, because, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, later on in that webcast, insurance companies are huge, gigantic companies, and they find it very challenging to integrate new small health tech providers. In AXA Partners, because we're a smaller unit, we have the power to integrate these startups and then to scale them up in the business. So today we're spending a lot of time creating an ecosystem of startups, of health tech companies, to loop them in our system with a view to make it relevant for customers at the right time. Thank you.
What I find very lovely to hear is at every part of the ecosystem, the payer, the provider, and the customer, and the doctor ecosystem, everybody seems to be reorienting their focus back to the customer. Because one of the things that I think is an elephant in the room, that the level of trust in the healthcare system, especially around the financial aspect of it, is getting lower and lower. And it's important to get back this patient trust by ensuring optimal cost and the correct treatment options. I know the symbiotic relationship and partnership between healthcare players, insurers, health tech companies, and providers can lead to this, and all of us in this conference are all working towards that. So maybe we can touch upon that, and Thibaut, I'll come back to you because you are the expert in that space again, coming from an insurance TPA perspective. What is your view on the partnership of the various players in the ecosystem?
So today, our whole industry must work with partnerships, I believe, because coming out with new solutions internally is too risky, too demanding, and it's too long, and the fast fish will hit the slow fish. So today, the partners we are working with, and we're looking at expanding this ecosystem. We have two conversations with them mainly. We ask our partners to help us improving the efficiency of our operations. So that means any company that can help us getting to a higher quality of claim adjudication, or help us with faster and cheaper payments. Cole was referring to the payment and the cashless element. Anything in that space is very welcome. Also, the data accuracy, right? Again, back to Cole's point, this industry needs to have more data, better data, wider data. Also, anything that is around the digitalization and the automation of processes, of course. Now, the second conversation we're having with health tech providers today is around improving health outcome. And I would say this is actually the most important in this space. We are very keen to work on disease-specific programs. We mentioned about the volume of people with diabetes in India, right? It's also extremely big in Singapore, for instance. So any health tech companies that can prove and that can demonstrate the impact on health cost for people with diabetes, typically, would make a hit in our system. Now, the second thing that we're looking at is also helping in the customer journey. So literally patient journey, anything that can simplify or make it easier for people to navigate between the admission, the diagnosis, the treatment, the discharge, and the follow-up. These are very impactful services today. And as a third point, I would say that today, individuals, patients, customers, insured people, you, me, we're also looking for more advice. We don't know, we're not from this, we're not doctors, so we're looking for companies, providers to help us navigate this system. And again, in that space, DocDoc is precisely aiming for that, steering patients to the right place at the right time. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to request Cole to share his thoughts because I know he works very closely with insurers, and then also request Julian, given your vast experience with payers, what are your point of views on this?
I think AXA is doing a heck of a good job here. In that setting up AXA Partners was a real, it reflected a very deep and profound understanding of their organization and its limitations and its strengths. What we found in AXA Partners can be small and nimble and can work with a variety of startups and really get a sense of what is the quality value proposition being offered and what's not, and can then filter up what works to AXA. And that makes a lot of sense as a model for me. One of the biggest challenges we've faced in DocDoc is trying to find insurers that can actually differentiate between high quality startups and low quality startups. There is a giant difference in the startup community in the healthcare space. There are very few startups that actually have the intellectual bandwidth and depth of bench on the team to really deliver at scale. And it's hard for a big start. The big insurance companies are just not equipped to make those assessments. And so I think what's happening with AXA Partners is actually a very smart strategic move, and I think that's going to serve AXA very well. But on to kind of what we're doing and what we're seeing in the space. I think that it's really important for startups as you're building out your ecosystem. If the insurance industry or large employers are going to be your primary clients, it's really important that you're bringing an ecosystem type solution. because consumers ultimately, what they're looking for, and what was mentioned earlier several times was trust. We need more trust. We need more. I don't think we need more trust in the space. I think we need more data. When I go to buy a car, it's not that I trust the car dealer. When I go to buy a stock, it's not that I trust the stockbroker. When I go to invest in a company, it's not because of the investment banker. I do it because the fundamental data I have access to tells me that I'm making a smart decision. And what we need to do in Asia is we need to get back, we need to move healthcare in that direction. And what's really nice is that insurance companies and patients are very aligned on this. It is in the insurance company's best interest to have their consumers making informed decisions. Because consumers, yes. Please go ahead. I'm sorry, somebody jumped in there?
No, I was just agreeing with you, Cole. Please continue.
Oh, I just think it's very important that they do that. I think that informed consumers will make decisions about healthcare that reduce complications and readmission rates. I think that they'll make decisions about care that maximize efficiency, because nobody wants to go to a doctor simply because they're expensive. They want to go to a doctor because the doctor's good.
Correct.
And so I think there's a large alignment here. It's just about getting the large companies and the small companies to operate on a similar frequency so they can actually work together well.
Correct. Julian, at this point, I'd request you to chime in. Given your payer perspective, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, my two esteemed co-speakers have adroitly addressed this topic. I guess an interesting aspect is the role that health tech or digital health is playing increasingly in bridging that gap between the customer and provider, or the customer and payer. That transparency, I guess, that Cole's referring to, is really the driver. The patient or customer is feeling more empowered because they are getting more access and they are getting more visibility and are able to get that transparency that says, I will get better care here. I'll get better value for money for that care. And so that outcome, which a few years ago was seen as possibly a bit more of a fad, let's say, by providers and payers, is now certainly being seen by both those stakeholder groups as a strategic imperative and one they're addressing as fast as they can. And so we are seeing an increasing number of partnerships, commercial partnerships, I think is probably the best way to describe them, between the health tech or digital health innovators like a Cole on this call, and the enterprise providing the services to the healthcare ecosystem, such as, for example, AXA. That exciting fusion of innovation and reach provided by each of those parties means that the desire by the customer to have better access at an affordable price point, and one that they understand and are able to compare, it can only really drive a better health outcome down the road.
Fabulous. I think one of the changes that is definitely happening and health tech or technology that's bringing is providers are increasingly collaborating and getting the opportunity to share knowledge and share experience, which is also changing the perspective. Cole, I know you are very closely connected with the provider ecosystem. Would you like to share how that is changing the way patient care is getting optimized?
I think the provider side, I think that the main thing happening with doctors right now is they're kind of caught in a very interesting position. As a whole, when I first got into the healthcare space, I started to get really hard on the medical community. And then as I've spent more time in this space, the more I began to understand the plight of the doctor, particularly in Asia. The medical community is caught in between the pharmaceutical industry, the medical device industry, the hospital lobby, and the insurance industry and governments. So oftentimes to be a doctor, is a lot harder than we realize. And I think that technology up to this point has really not made it easier to be a doctor. In many ways, it's made it harder. Up to this point, you know, electronic medical records have only meant more data input by the doctor, and the better diagnostic capabilities has often meant more defensive medicine and more tests that need to be run. You know, the greater strength of hospitals in the lobby, you know, in the overall incentive matrix has oftentimes also exacerbated defensive medicine. But I think this is changing. I think we're at the cusp now where technology begins to make doctors' lives better. I think we're getting much better at the input interface around medical records for doctors. I think that we're now starting to aggregate enough data that we can begin to start steering patients to doctors that are relevant to the doctor. That makes their life much better. I mean, they're better able to provide quality care, which is why they got into the space in the beginning. I think we're seeing insurance companies recognize the need to become more data-centric. And the more data-centric insurance companies become, the more they get aligned with the underlying customer. And then the more the good doctors, high-quality, average-cost doctors become preferenced, whereas low-quality, high-priced doctors become demoted. And I think that's good for any industry. And I think the medical industry is a little overdue for that. So as a whole, I think the medical industry is ripe for having technology really help them make their lives better in the industry. And I think that transparency is good for the average physician. I think that the improvements in data technology is also helping, and an increase in data-centric services are also helping the average physician.
Julien, your point of view from the experience that you are building a health tech ecosystem, would you agree with Cole? Do you think that the providers are really capitalizing on all the technology advancements that are happening?
Thanks. It's a very good question, because I think we are at risk of hubris here in relation to the excitement in the space and the amount of adoption and engagement by payers and providers with the ecosystem. And we've got to remember, we are in healthcare, which is generally and insurance for that matter as well, a risk-averse environment because people's lives are at risk. To help, though, the audience better understand what we mean by health tech, and or also known as digital health, we're really looking at solutions here that are being innovated largely because we have a greater access to data and some much faster, better, stronger computational power to actually analyze that data. And I forget who put it, but somebody coined a phrase a few years ago that the future of medicine is not a science issue, but more of a data issue. So you know, we're starting to see some light at the end of that tunnel through this innovation. The exciting bit of this is that the ecosystem is growing very fast. We at Galen Growth Asia have been tracking it now for the last 3 years, and are, you know, very excited to see it suddenly break all records last year in relation to the amount of funding that was deployed in this ecosystem. So much so that Asia Pacific is the second largest health tech ecosystem in the world, and not far behind the US in terms of total amount of funding invested. We track, you know, some just over 4,000 health tech, digital health ventures across the region. And we have certainly seen over the years a maturing of that ecosystem, from initially certainly very much some e-commerce platforms with a health flavor to them, to an ecosystem that is now generating some really interesting platforms as far as, say, the whole R&D side of healthcare, such as, say, clinical trials or drug discovery. So it is certainly a fast-growing ecosystem with a great deal of sophistication bubbling through. Now, like any innovation, it is nascent and starting to scale in a way that consumers are seeing a difference. You know, those particular innovators are starting to generate value, both social as well as financial, with their solutions. In terms of your specific question, yes, we are seeing engagement between industry, or should I say payers and providers, with this innovative ecosystem. But I would describe it as reasonably new and reasonably timid so far. And if you therefore look a bit, I guess, at the maturity of engagement, from indifferent on one end of the spectrum to highly engaged and partnering or multi-partnering, let's say, on the right-hand side of that spectrum, essentially the greater bulk of payers and providers sit somewhere towards the left, varying towards the middle, let's say. There are in fact very few payers and providers in Asia Pacific, certainly, and there could be multinationals as well. So I'm really talking about those operating in Asia Pacific, formally, wholeheartedly engaging with the digital health or health ecosystem. And some of those challenges are really driven by the fact there is insufficient leadership and clear mandate to actually engage. Now, it's not all bad news for innovators in the space, as Cole will testify with his achievements in the last few years. We are seeing some really promising partnerships, commercial partnerships between payers and providers with the startup ecosystem, we see that symbiosis generating value for both parties. The innovator has a really exciting solution that they need to scale, they need to have validation with, they need to find a way of monetizing, and of course the enterprise, for those that have realized that fact, have understood that their own value chain needs to evolve, and they have a choice really of trying to build that themselves, which will take them an inordinate amount of time at an incredible cost, or they can partner with the very nimble innovator on the ground, who she or he has built into a platform that is actually making a difference on the ground, and doing so at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. It's an exciting time to be an innovator. It's an exciting time to be a innovation transformation lead for a large organization such as an AXA. And certainly we're seeing we're hearing and we're seeing all the right elements for a very encouraging 2019. And certainly, as a bit of a lofty goal here, certainly very encouraging as far as seeing the improvement of delivery of healthcare in Asia Pacific, and ultimately, of course, patient outcomes.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Especially, it's valuable from you because you lead a health tech startup and do some really innovative work with AI and analytics. And Cole, you yourself are a successful startup company. DocDoc is very quickly now becoming a name to reckon with. What is your thought around the collaboration with the larger healthcare ecosystem, and how can health tech and startup perspective really make a difference and be leveraged?
I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot of different things that there's a lot of benefit. There's a lot of benefit for both parties to be working together. I think the biggest issue, and let's talk about the challenges first, because the opportunities are really self-evident. The challenges are timing. How do you startups can't work on a 2-year sales cycle. And oftentimes, a lot of the insurance industry as a whole, that's really the sales cycle to get into a partnership of any scale with a large insurance company. And so the real challenge here is how do you truncate that process? How do you start out small enough with an insurance company to be worth their time, but at the same time to be able to provide enough value to justify a larger partnership with them? And I think the whole industry is struggling with this. In a previous comment, I alluded earlier to the intelligence and managerial wisdom of AXA setting up AXA Partners. I think they were setting that up to address this exact issue. And a lot of the insurance industry would be vastly better off following suit with something like that. I think another problem here that you're really facing is the insurance industry as a whole hasn't figured out how to invest in innovation. A big part, they're always inevitably, when you get into the sales cycle with a large insurer, you end up running into the actuary. And the head actuary, I've never in any of my insurance partnerships yet, have I had the head actuary come into the meeting and say, this is great, let's do it. It's always from the perspective of, can you prove to me the following 300 data points? And by the time that we have that kind of data to be justifying, for example, in DocDoc's case, what we do is we help patients find the right doctor for a particular course of care at a procedure or condition level of granularity. And so at the point of time where I can begin to show you sample sets of, women between the ages of 50 and 60 that have had hip replacements that DocDoc has sent to the steered doctors versus random doctors, and then look at their long-term outcomes, that's 5 to 10 years away from now. And so when we're selling into the industry, we're having to basically convince the CEO level of the organization that the cost of darkness is far higher than the price of light in terms of analytics and steering in terms of analytics and steering, and that customer journey is really important. But that's a hard sell over an actuary. And so I think that's the initial battle, is justifying customer service and justifying the investment in analytics.
Fabulous. Thank you, Cole, for that perspective. And I think this has brought in the various aspects of how a provider, a TPA, a new health tech company, a customer, or a patient, they all need to work together to make this happen. One thing about this whole conversation that I can get is we are in a very exciting time, and what we do every day is a constant reminder that we are knee deep in a very beginning of potentially a large transformation, which is going to be driven by health tech. I'm going to take a minute and allow all of us to think about, if we were given a blank canvas, if we were given potentially all the resources required and the changes allowed if we wanted to make them, what do you think the future of health tech in Asia would look like? Maybe I can start with Thibault and then move on to Cole and Julian.
Thank you very much. Good one. Well, I guess if I had a magic wand today, right, I would impose as much transparency as possible in this entire healthcare ecosystem. I think the future of healthcare is great in Asia. Awareness is rising, insurance penetration is growing, healthcare, the quality of healthcare is improving. But today, I am of the opinion that the only way to get to full transparency in that space is actually for the regulator to trigger. And sometimes I have a feeling that regulators in every country where we operate aren't necessarily fully aware of the positive impact of more transparency. So if I had a magic wand to answer your question, I would have all regulators push legally for more transparency.
Excellent. Cole, your 2 cents?
I agree 100%. And then the second thing I would add is, so transparency is a big point. The second thing I would do is I would really push the idea that food is medicine. Everybody's talking about, healthcare as in waiting for people that are already sick. But, as earlier I was articulated that, 30% of Malaysia is pre-diabetic right now. And approximately the same level is pre-diabetic in the cities in China as well. That's because people have this separation of the idea that food is somehow separate from health. And it's a real problem. And so if we can get a lot more transparency into the healthcare system, and this is kind of, earlier I talked about DocDoc as a category defining company around patient empowerment. Well, patient empowerment has to also be around this idea that medicine, around wellness and health. You know, you have no wealth if you have no health. And if you don't eat well, you won't have health for long. And I'm amazed the number of people that we see that get just run through the medical establishment and nobody mentions to them, hey, maybe the problem is that you're grossly overweight because you eat too much. Maybe the problem is that your carbohydrate ratio relative to your leafy vegetable ratio is just a disaster. You know, these are things that we need to also articulate into the community, because ultimately healthcare is about health.
Excellent point. Julian, your thoughts?
So taking over the magic wand for a few minutes. Listen, not so long ago, and I suspect it's a few years now, but if you recall, Google had a 20% rule, which was allegedly, I don't think it was ever sort of confirmed in great detail, but if you remember, the founder, Sergey Brin, said something: we encourage our employees, in addition to their regular projects, to spend 20% of their time working on what they think will benefit, in other words, be more creative. So I'm mentioning this because my concern is with a lot of the people I meet at payers and at providers are so consumed with their everyday operational activities that they have little or no time to think beyond what they're currently doing, and really think about how the patient or the customer could have a better life, or could have be able to enjoy their life in a different way. And so if I had a chance, I would certainly encourage the leaders of these organizations to start creating a rule, a 20% rule, whereby their business leadership as a whole have to spend 20% of their time looking beyond the walls of the organization at what's truly happening in their ecosystem and how they can play a catalyst role in improving health as a key player in that equation.
Excellent thoughts. And as I am looking at this, we have a few questions that are coming in. We'll try and cover them before we wrap up the session today. One of the questions that I found interesting is, and Tiblo, you may be the best person to answer this right now. Can you share one success and one failure example for collaboration between an insurance company or a TPA and a health tech company?
Sure. I think a failure, I will start with the failure, is health tech companies with great vision, but actually relatively limited understanding of the insurance world. So I've seen health tech companies coming in and plugging to insurance companies and failing in a matter of days in that space. Now, what has been great successes? I think it's always the same thing. It's health tech companies who I would say share three major elements. First, they are able to define what good looks like. I mean, to know their market, right? It's one thing to have the vision to make a revolution in the healthcare space. It's another thing to understand that in Singapore, you only have 6 million inhabitants. 20% of them are diabetic. Maybe 50% of them are insured. So literally, when you provide a diabetic solution to a Singapore market, then what is really the population you're addressing? Now, the second thing that I've seen come up regularly is health tech who are able to be precise in what they're aiming for. So Cole, I don't want to be the underwriter you seemed to really have affection for before. So we don't need 300 touch points, but we need to know what you are actually impacting. Is it helping on marketing purely, or is it impacting admission, diagnosis, treatment, and discharge? Is it a clinical thing? Is it operation? Is it logistics, procurement, financial? I don't know, but being able to demonstrate effectiveness. And the last one, I think, it's health tech companies who are able to select their partners. Not all insurance companies are, I would say, easy to plug to. So spend time understanding the insurance companies you want to work with. Don't dilute your efforts in collaborating with everyone on the market. You're not going to get there. So that's what I found to be a common criteria for successes of Healthtech partnerships in Asia so far.
Absolutely. I'll just add one more thing, and which seems to sometimes not get mentioned, but everybody intends, and that is talent. Having the talent in the insurance space who understand the value of tech, and the health tech companies having talent that understand the business, the insurance business, or the part of the process you are trying to transform becomes critically important. Technology for the sake of technology very often can fail, and business, digital business can be the key success driver. The second question that I see here is, and I think it's directed to Cole, DocDoc seems to have recently struck a chord with the insurance industry. You've been in the business for about 5 to 6 years, and can you share some of the value and success criteria, and how come it took about almost 8 years, 7 years to for the insurance industry to see your value?
So yeah, a couple of comments. First, I think that I could not possibly agree more with what Thibaut was just saying. It is really, really important for a startup to interview their clients with as much discernment as a venture capitalist would interview a company they were investing in, because there are definitely bad actors in the industry. And some of that is intentional, and other part of it is actually more around what I would call just negligence. So if you step into a startup, if you step into an insurance partnership and it takes you a year to get to the starting gate, and then you invest a few $1 million into it to actually make it successful, and then your partner on the other end kind of goes, oh, well, yeah, we're just not going to do this anymore because that guy left his role. There's a new person coming in. I've seen that happen to a lot of startups. And so it's really important that you interview the insurance industry as much as they interview you. So I couldn't agree with that idea more. As to how long it's taken DocDoc, it's taken DocDoc about realistically 4 years of really speaking with insurance companies and bringing an ecosystem solution to them to really gain traction. And I think that's a function of a couple of different variables. One of them is that, and this is something that it's funny because when I'm asked to give speaking engagements at a lot of these startup events, I'm always told, hey, you want to rally up the crowd and get the crowd more excited. And what I have to tell them is, hey, wait a minute, digital health is really hard. It takes a long time. It's hard to build. I mean, if you think about DocDoc, for us to build a network of 23,000 doctors in 8 countries, we had a door to build that. And for every insurance deal, and we now have several major partnerships that are in the that we're announcing. For each one of those partnerships, we had to have a critical mass of doctors in that market before they would take us seriously. We had to build a call center that's full of doctors that could actually deliver consistently a very high quality experience. We had to build an underlying knowledge model that could compare doctors based on medically relevant intermediate markers. That took years. So unlike a lot of other segments in the consumer internet space, consumer digital health takes a long time to build correctly and to really deliver value. And the sales pipeline in an insurance space also takes, even with the best partners, it's still a year sales cycle before you really start seeing meaningful revenue. And that's if you do it really well. So I think that that's kind of part of the reason why it's taken that much time. And I don't think that's unique. I think if you look now into the insurance space in more developed markets, your more successful startups in the health tech space that deal with insurers and large employers and governments, they were around for 4 or 5 years before they started getting real mass adoption in the industry.
Excellent. We are coming up on the wrap up of the time, but I think we can take one more question. What advice would you give to new health tech companies who wish to collaborate with insurance companies and providers? Should I pass this on to Julian? Would you like to take that?
Absolutely, more than happy to do that. It's a conversation I have regularly with health tech startups in this region, but I'm conscious of time, so let me keep it fairly tight. The first one I think really comes back to what Cole was saying, which is understand quickly who the decision maker in that organization is. You will end up talking to a lot of people who are either enthusiastic about health tech or just want to be involved, but not necessarily have the decision making mandate, let's call it that, to actually be able to move the whole thing forwards. And until you've met that person and you've understood which way they lean in relation to your innovation, you will continue going round in circles, burning a lot of time. The second one is linked to that, and it is do your due diligence. You can bet that the large organization will do their due diligence in relation to you and your organization, but do your own due diligence. Understand whether there's a mandate in the organization. Is this a must do or is it a nice to do in the organization? And once you've ascertained that, do continue digging in and understand what the executive or the execution strategy, let's say, for this mandate is. Have they really thought this through? Do they know how you feature as a building block in achieving that strategy? The third one, which is a slightly tongue-in-cheek one, but I think an important one, particularly in this region, and that is my advice to all CEO founders of a health tech startup talking to any corporate, not just the insurers, and that is avoid the expat who has been there for 2 to 3 years. He or she is likely to be moving on 12 months down the road, and you're likely to be returning back to square one in positioning yourself with that organization.
Excellent. Golden nuggets here. I think we have completely run out of time. We have a few more questions coming, but we will take that over email given the time constraint. One thing is clear, a revolution is coming, and we need to enable a supportive ecosystem to take advantage of this. I thank all of you for attending this webinar. A special thanks to Tiblu, Cole, and Julien for sharing your knowledge. This concludes the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.